She sat across from me at Rosewood Café, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her latte cup, speaking loud enough for the entire coffee shop to hear. "I always knew Sophia poisoned my David against me," she declared to her bridge club friends, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Some women are just manipulative like that. They isolate men from their families. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I froze in the booth behind her, my 8-year-old daughter Lily sitting beside me, coloring in her unicorn book. The words hit me like a physical blow. But what Katherine Brennan didn't know was that Lily had been secretly screenshotting her grandmother's text messages for months, messages that would soon reveal who was really doing the poisoning. Let me tell you how we got here, because this story isn't just about one woman's lies. It's about gaslighting, manipulation, and how sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected source. I'm Sophia Chen, and for the past 4 years, I've been married to David Brennan, the love of my life and father to my daughter Lily. David adopted Lily when she was 5, and she's never known another dad. To her, David isn't her stepfather. He's simply Dad, the man who reads her bedtime stories, helps with homework, and makes pancakes shaped like butterflies every Sunday morning. But to Katherine Brennan, David's mother, I've always been the enemy. From the moment David introduced me at a family barbecue in Millbrook Heights, she made it clear that I wasn't welcome in her perfect little world. I remember that first meeting like it was yesterday, the way her smile faltered when David mentioned I was a single mother, how she immediately asked about Lily's real father, and the way she whispered to her sister about women who trap men with children. David noticed it too, but like many sons, he wanted to believe his mother would come around. "She just needs time to get to know you," he'd say after particularly awkward family dinners. "Once she sees how happy we are together, she'll accept you." But Katherine had other plans. She began what I now recognize as a systematic campaign to drive a wedge between David and me. It started small, forgetting to invite me to family events, planning mother-son outings during times she knew we had plans together, making comments about how David seemed stressed whenever I was around. The real manipulation began after David and I got engaged. Suddenly, Katherine was calling David multiple times a day, crying about various health scares that would mysteriously resolve themselves the moment he'd cancel our plans to rush to her side. She'd show up at our apartment unannounced, claiming she was worried about David because he looked tired or seemed distant. "She's changing you," she'd tell him during these visits, shooting glances in my direction. "You never used to ignore your mother's calls. You never used to be too busy for family." What she was really doing was creating problems that didn't exist, then positioning herself as the solution. Every conversation became about how our relationship was somehow damaging David's connection to his family. She'd manufacture crises, then swoop in as the caring mother trying to save her son from his manipulative girlfriend. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Katherine insisted on being involved in every decision, then would veto everything I suggested, while praising alternatives that happened to exclude my input entirely. When I wanted to include photos of Lily and me in the ceremony slideshow, Katherine suggested it might be confusing for guests, since Lily wasn't David's biological daughter. When I proposed a small, intimate ceremony, she pushed for a large reception, then complained about the cost being a burden on David. Through it all, she painted herself as the reasonable one. "I just want David to be happy," she'd say with that practiced martyr's sigh. "I'm not trying to cause problems." But every suggestion she made seemed designed to minimize my role in David's life or exclude me from family traditions. The pattern became clear. Katherine would create conflict, then position me as the source of that conflict. If David seemed tired after working overtime, it was because I was being demanding. If he couldn't make it to Sunday dinner, it was because I was keeping him away from his family. If he set boundaries with her constant phone calls, It was because I had poisoned him against her. After we married and moved to our house on Elmwood Street, the manipulation escalated. Katherine would text David constantly throughout the day, messages filled with subtle guilt trips about how lonely she was, how she missed the old David, how worried she was about his happiness. Then she'd follow up with calls, analyzing his responses for signs that I was controlling his communication. She'd send articles about warning signs of controlling relationships and how women isolate men from their families. She'd share social media posts about the importance of mother-son bonds and how wives who really loved their husbands would encourage family closeness. Every message was carefully crafted to plant seeds of doubt about our marriage. But here's what Katherine didn't count on. Lily has always been incredibly observant for her age. She noticed how tense these visits made David and me. She heard the phone calls that would leave David frustrated and guilty, and she started paying attention to the text messages that would light up his phone at all hours. What Katherine also didn't know was that Lily had figured out how to use the screenshot function on David's tablet, the same tablet Katherine thought she was using privately when she'd messaged David during family movie nights or dinner conversations. For months, Lily had been quietly documenting Katherine's campaign of manipulation. Screenshots of texts sent at midnight designed to interrupt our sleep. Messages timed perfectly to arrive during our date nights. Guilt trips about David's changing personality that coincidentally appeared whenever we posted happy family photos on social media. Lily saw what David and I were too close to recognize. A calculated pattern of emotional manipulation designed to destroy our marriage from the inside out. And today, sitting in this coffee shop, listening to Katherine tell her friends how I had poisoned David against her, Lily decided it was time to show everyone who was really doing the poisoning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Before I tell you about Katherine's web of lies, you need to understand why her accusations cut so deep. You need to know where I came from, and why the idea of poisoning someone against their family felt like a knife twisted in an old wound. I grew up in Cedar Falls, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents, Helen and Robert Chen, owned the only Chinese restaurant in town, Golden Dragon, and worked 16-hour days just to keep it afloat. As their only child, I spent most of my childhood in that restaurant, doing homework at corner tables, while the smell of sweet and sour sauce became as familiar as my own heartbeat. But our little family had a secret that ate away at us from the inside. My father struggled with gambling addiction, something we discovered when I was 14 and the bank came to repossess our house. My mother had been covering for him for years, working double shifts and borrowing money from relatives, too ashamed to admit that the man she loved was slowly destroying everything they'd built together. I watched my mother shrink under the weight of keeping his secret. She'd smile at customers while knowing she might not be able to pay the suppliers. She'd laugh with neighbors while calculating whether she could afford groceries that week. The stress gave her migraines so severe she'd sometimes collapse in the restaurant kitchen, but she never stopped protecting him. When I was 16, everything collapsed. Dad had taken out loans against the restaurant without telling Mom, forging her signature on documents that put our entire livelihood at risk. The night we found out, I heard them fighting through my bedroom wall. Mom's voice breaking as she realized the extent of his deception, Dad making promises he'd already broken 100 times before. That's when I learned what real manipulation looks like. Dad didn't just gamble away our money. He convinced Mom that his addiction was somehow her fault, that she wasn't supportive enough, understanding enough, loving enough. He made her believe that if she just tried harder, loved him better, he would change. Every relapse was reframed as her failure as a wife. I watched him isolate her from her sister, who had tried to warn her about the gambling. I saw him turn her friends against her by borrowing money from them and never paying it back, leaving Mom too embarrassed to maintain those relationships. He slowly cut away every support system she had until he was the only person left in her world, the same person who was destroying it. The restaurant closed when I was 17. We lost the house 6 months later. Mom took a job as a cashier at Brennan's grocery store. Yes, the same chain owned by David's family, though I wouldn't learn that connection for years. She worked there until arthritis made it impossible for her to stand for 8-hour shifts, always sending me money she couldn't afford to spare for college. Dad left on a Tuesday morning when I was 18, taking what little savings we had left and leaving behind a note about starting fresh. Mom found him 2 states away, living with another woman he'd met at a casino. When she begged him to come home, he told her she had become too negative and was holding him back from happiness. I was a freshman at Riverside Community College when Mom called to tell me Dad wasn't coming back. I drove home that weekend to find her sitting in our empty apartment. We'd been evicted and had to sell most of our furniture, staring at family photos like she was trying to figure out where everything went wrong. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "I tried so hard to keep our family together. Maybe if I had been more patient, more understanding." Even then, even after everything he'd put us through, she was blaming herself for his choices. That's what manipulation does. It rewrites your story until you become the villain in your own life. I finished college while working 3 part-time jobs, determined to build a stable life for myself. I became a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Riverside, found an apartment I could afford, started dating a man named Marcus Rivera who seemed kind and steady. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real. Marcus was a teacher at Jefferson Elementary, and he had this gentle way with children that made me think he'd be an amazing father someday. We talked about marriage, about kids, about the kind of family we wanted to create, one built on honesty and trust, nothing like the house of cards I'd grown up in. But Marcus had his own secrets. 3 years into our relationship, I discovered he'd been having an affair with a colleague. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he turned it around on me. I was too focused on work, he said, too independent, too damaged from my childhood to really trust anyone. He made it sound like his cheating was actually a response to my emotional unavailability. "You push people away," he told me during our final fight. "You're so afraid of being hurt that you don't let anyone really love you. No wonder I had to find affection somewhere else." Sound familiar? The same playbook my father had used on my mother. Take your own destructive choices and make them somehow the other person's fault. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of him coming home to me every night, making plans for our future, while secretly telling another woman that I was the problem in his life. The betrayal was devastating, but the gaslighting was worse. He had me questioning whether I really was too closed off, too difficult to love. I was 26 when Marcus left, 27 when I found out I was pregnant. Yes, pregnant. The timeline was undeniable. The baby was his. But when I called to tell him, he accused me of trying to trap him, of getting pregnant on purpose to force him back into the relationship. He demanded a paternity test and suggested I was probably sleeping with other people anyway. I was alone, pregnant, working as a nurse while dealing with morning sickness that lasted all day. My mother was struggling with her own health issues and couldn't provide much support. Marcus's family, who had once welcomed me warmly, suddenly became cold and distant, clearly believing his version of events. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I knew I couldn't raise a child in the toxic environment Marcus would create if he stayed involved. I knew he would use that child as a weapon against me for the rest of my life, the same way my father had used his addiction to control my mother. So, I moved, packed up my life, took a job at Millbrook General Hospital, and started over in a place where nobody knew my story. I had Lily 3 months after arriving in Millbrook Heights, and I raised her alone for the first 4 years of her life. Those were hard years, but they were honest years. I worked night shifts so I could be home with Lily during the day. I survived on 3 hours of sleep and determination. I read her stories and played dress-up and taught her that a family doesn't have to look like everyone else's to be complete. Most importantly, I promised myself that I would never again let someone gaslight me into believing their problems were my fault. I would never again stay quiet while someone rewrote my story to make themselves the victim. That promise would be tested in ways I never imagined when I met David Brennan, and his mother decided I was the enemy. I met David on the worst day of my life, which turned out to be the beginning of the best chapter I'd ever written. It was a Thursday evening in October, and I was rushing through the parking lot of Millbrook General Hospital after pulling a double shift. Lily was at after-school care, probably the last kid there again, and I was already 20 minutes late for pickup. My phone was buzzing with texts from the daycare coordinator. My scrubs were stained with coffee from a particularly chaotic day in pediatrics, and I was fighting back tears of exhaustion and guilt. That's when I collided, literally, with David Brennan. I was digging through my purse for car keys, not watching where I was going, when I walked straight into this tall guy carrying a bouquet of yellow roses. The flowers went flying, my purse spilled everywhere, and I found myself sitting on the asphalt looking up at the most apologetic brown eyes I'd ever seen. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," he said, immediately dropping to help gather my scattered belongings. I wasn't paying attention either. "Are you hurt?" Most people in Millbrook Heights knew who David Brennan was. His family owned half the commercial real estate in town, including the hospital where I worked. But in that moment, he was just a kind stranger picking up my lip balm and work ID, carefully collecting the yellow roses that were now scattered across the parking lot. "These were for my grandmother," he said, looking sadly at the bruised petals. "She's been in room 314 for 2 weeks, and yellow roses are her favorites." I knew room 314. Mrs. Eleanor Brennan, 93 years old, admitted for pneumonia that had turned into a longer stay due to complications. She was one of my favorite patients, always asking about my daughter, always having a story ready about her grandson David who visited every single day. "You're Eleanor's David," I said, suddenly understanding. "She talks about you constantly. I'm Sophia. I've been one of her nurses." His whole face changed when he realized the connection. "You're Lily's mom. Grandma Eleanor shows everyone the drawing Lily made for her, the one with all the butterflies. She has it taped to her bedside table." That drawing. Lily had been with me during one of my shifts when childcare fell through, and she'd spent an hour carefully coloring a picture for the nice old lady who likes my unicorn socks. Mrs. Eleanor had treasured it like it was a masterpiece from the Metropolitan Museum. David insisted on buying me coffee to apologize for the collision, even though it had been entirely my fault. We sat in the hospital cafeteria while I called the daycare to explain I'd be a few more minutes late. I expected him to make polite conversation and then escape back to his grandmother's room. But instead, he asked about Lily. Not the usual questions people asked single mothers. Where's her father? How do you manage alone? Isn't it hard? But real questions. What was she interested in? What made her laugh? What was her favorite subject in school? "She wants to be a veterinarian," I told him. "She's been saying that since she was 3, and she's never wavered. She practices on all her stuffed animals and has this little plastic stethoscope she carries everywhere." "That's incredible," David said, and I could tell he meant it. "Most kids that age change their minds every week. She sounds like she really knows herself." When I mentioned that Lily's biggest disappointment was that we couldn't have pets in our apartment, David's eyes lit up. "Has she ever been to Riverside Animal Sanctuary? They do educational programs for kids. I volunteer there sometimes, help with fundraising events." That's how our first official date happened. David invited Lily and me to the sanctuary's future Veterinarian's Day the following Saturday. I almost said no. I'd learned to be cautious about men who seemed too good to be true. But something about the way he'd carefully gathered those scattered roses made me want to take a chance. Lily. Fell in love with David before I did, which probably sounds terrible to admit, but it's the truth. At the animal sanctuary, he didn't just supervise while she pet the rabbits. He asked the staff detailed questions about their care so he could answer her endless stream of curiosities. When she wanted to know why one of the dogs was limping, he found the veterinarian and arranged an impromptu lesson about animal rehabilitation. "Mr. David knows everything about animals," Lily announced on the drive home, clutching a stuffed animal hospital playset he'd bought her from the gift shop. "Can we see him again?" Our second date was just David and me. Dinner at Lorenzo's, the little Italian place on Main Street. I'd been nervous about leaving Lily with a babysitter, texting to check on her every hour until David gently suggested I put my phone away. "She's safe," he said, "and you deserve to exist as Sophia, not just as Lily's mom for a few hours." That comment should have been a red flag. I'd heard similar things from Marcus, who used to complain that I was too focused on being a mother. But David wasn't diminishing my role as a parent. He was acknowledging that I was a complete person, with my own dreams and interests, something I'd almost forgotten about myself. We talked for 3 hours, about books. He loved mystery novels. I preferred biographies. About travel dreams. He wanted to see the Northern Lights. I dreamed of taking Lily to Disney World. About work, his passion for urban planning and community development, my love for pediatric nursing and helping families through medical crises. What struck me most was how he listened. Really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk. When I mentioned that I'd been taking online courses toward my nurse practitioner degree, he wanted to know about my specialty interests. When I talked about Lily's academic achievements, he celebrated them like they were his own daughter's accomplishments. By our 4th date, I was terrified. Not of David, but of how much I was starting to care about him. I'd built such careful walls around my heart, and he was dismantling them with kindness and genuine interest. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to reveal some hidden agenda or character flaw that would explain why he seemed too good to be real. The shoe never dropped. Instead, David integrated himself into our lives so naturally it felt like he'd always been there. He showed up to Lily's school play with flowers, not for me, but for her. He helped her with a science project about the solar system, staying up until midnight building a papier-mâché Saturn because she wanted it to be perfect. He learned to braid her hair when I had to work early shifts, watching YouTube tutorials until he could create the elaborate princess styles she preferred. Most importantly, he never tried to replace her father or act like he had automatic authority in her life. He earned her trust and respect the same way he'd earned mine, through consistency, kindness, and genuine care. 6 months into our relationship, Lily asked if David was going to be her new daddy. I panicked, worried that she was getting too attached too quickly, but David handled it perfectly. "I'd love to be your dad if that's what you want," he told her. "But that's a decision for you and your mom to make together, and there's no rush. What matters most is that we all care about each other." That night, after Lily was asleep, David and I had our first serious conversation about the future. He told me he loved me. Not just me, but the life we were building together. He loved Saturday morning pancakes and bedtime story negotiations, and the chaos of building blanket forts in the living room. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know you've been hurt before, and I know trust doesn't come easily. But I'm not going anywhere, Sophia. This isn't some trial run for me. You and Lily. This is what I want my life to look like." 8 months later, he proposed. Not with some elaborate public display, but on a quiet Sunday morning while we were making breakfast. Lily was at the counter, carefully measuring pancake mix, when David dropped to one knee in our little kitchen. "I want to make this official," he said, holding out a ring that was exactly what I would have chosen. Simple, elegant, with a small diamond that caught the morning light. "I want to be Lily's dad and your husband, if you'll have me, Lily." Squealed so loudly she woke up Mrs. Patterson next door. Does this mean we're going to be a real family? She asked, bouncing on her toes. We already are a real family, David said, pulling her into the hug. Now we're just going to make it legal. The engagement period was the happiest 8 months of my life. David moved into our apartment on Elmwood Street, and suddenly I had a partner in everything. Someone to share bedtime duties and grocery, shopping, and the million little decisions that make up daily life with a child. Someone who celebrated Lily's good grades like they were Olympic victories and held me when I had bad days at work. For the first time since my father left, I understood what a healthy family looked like. We had disagreements, of course, but we talked through them instead of turning them into weapons. We supported each other's individual goals while building shared dreams. We made Lily feel secure and loved while also maintaining our relationship as a couple. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have remembered that in my experience, happiness always came with a price. That price had a name, Katherine Brennan. I met Katherine Brennan exactly 3 weeks before David proposed, and she made her position clear within the first 5 minutes of our introduction. David had been nervous about this meeting for days. His mother had been traveling in Europe for most of our relationship, a 2-month cruise followed by an extended stay with her sister in London, and this would be her first time meeting both Lily and me. David had built her up as this worldly, sophisticated woman who would absolutely love us once she got to know us. The meeting was arranged for Sunday brunch at the Grandview Country Club, Katherine's preferred venue for important social occasions. As we pulled into the circular driveway, I felt underdressed despite David's assurances that my navy dress and cardigan were perfect. The building looked like something from a movie, all white columns and manicured gardens, with valets in crisp uniforms and women in tennis whites walking through the entrance like they owned the world. Katherine was waiting at a corner table, overlooking the golf course, and I could see where David got his height and strong jawline. She was elegantly dressed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or social status. She stood when she saw David approaching, her face lighting up with genuine warmth and affection. "My darling boy," she said, embracing him tightly. "You look wonderful. Europe was magnificent, but I missed you terribly." Then her eyes shifted to Lily and me, and that warmth disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. "And you must be Sophia," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand for a handshake instead of the hug she'd given David. Her grip was firm but brief, and her smile never reached her eyes. "David has told me so much about you." The way she said it made it sound like an accusation rather than a pleasantry. She turned to Lily, who was holding my hand and wearing her favorite yellow dress with butterfly appliques. "And this is Lily, isn't it?" Katherine's voice took on that artificial sweetness adults sometimes use with children they don't particularly like. "What a spirited little girl." Spirited. Not adorable, not charming, not any of the words adults typically used to describe Lily, who was genuinely one of the most well-behaved and articulate children I'd ever known. Spirited was Katherine's polite way of saying she found my daughter somehow problematic before they'd even exchanged a word. Lunch was a masterclass in passive aggression disguised as polite conversation. Katherine asked about my work at the hospital, but when I mentioned pediatric nursing, she immediately launched into a story about her friend Margaret, whose daughter had wasted her intelligence on nursing instead of pursuing something more prestigious like medicine or law. "Of course, nursing is perfectly respectable work," she added with a patronizing smile. "Someone has to do it." When Lily mentioned that she wanted to be a veterinarian, Katherine's response was swift and cutting. "How sweet. Most children your age change their minds about careers every week. I'm sure you'll discover many other options as you get older." She said this while looking directly at me, as if Lily's career dreams were somehow a reflection of my parenting inadequacy. The conversation, turned to David's work, and Katherine brightened immediately. She spoke with obvious pride about his latest urban development project, his promotion to senior partner at Richardson and Associates, his recognition by the Millbrook Heights Business Council. But every compliment about David somehow included a subtle dig at me. "It's wonderful to see you so successful, darling," she told him. "Though you do look tired. I hope you're not overextending yourself with additional responsibilities." Additional responsibilities. That's how she referred to Lily and me. Not as his family, not as people he loved, but as burdens he'd taken on. When David excused himself to take a work call, Katherine immediately shifted into interrogation mode. Her questions were phrased politely, but the intent was unmistakable. How long had I been divorced? Why had Lily's father left? Did I receive child support? How much money did I make? Did I have any family in Millbrook Heights? Each question was designed to highlight my status as an outsider, a single mother with no local connections or financial security. When I mentioned that my mother lived 2 hours away in Cedar Falls, Katherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "How challenging for you, having no family support nearby. It must be difficult managing everything on your own." She made it sound like a character flaw rather than a circumstance. The conversation that really revealed Katherine's true feelings happened when Lily went to the restroom. Katherine leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Sophia, I hope you understand that I only want what's best for David," she began. "He's always been so generous with his affections, sometimes too generous. He sees the best in people, even when others might be more cautious." My stomach clenched. I knew where this was heading. "David has worked very hard to build his career and his reputation in this community," she continued. "He comes from a family with certain expectations, certain standards. I'm sure you can appreciate that bringing a ready-made family into that picture might be complicated. Ready-made family. Like Lily and I were a discount package deal from Costco." "I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your situation," Katherine added quickly, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Single motherhood takes tremendous strength. But David has never had to think about things like custody arrangements, ex-husbands, the complexities of blended families. He's naive about how these situations can affect a man's professional and social standing." When Lily returned from the restroom, Katherine seamlessly switched back to grandmotherly mode, complimenting Lily's dress and asking about school. But the damage was done. The message was clear. I wasn't good enough for her son, and my daughter was a complication that would inevitably drag David down. The drive home was tense. David kept asking if I'd enjoyed meeting his mother, clearly hoping for positive feedback. I gave diplomatic answers. She seemed lovely. The restaurant was beautiful. She obviously cares about you very much, while internally processing what had just happened. That evening, after Lily was asleep, David brought up the brunch again. "Mom really liked you," he said, settling onto the couch beside me. "She told me she thought you were very substantial." Substantial. Another one of Katherine's coded insults disguised as a compliment. "She's worried about you taking on too much responsibility too quickly," I said carefully, not wanting to create conflict, but needing to address what had happened. David frowned. "What do you mean?" "She seems to think that marrying me means you're getting more than you bargained for." "That's ridiculous," David said immediately. "You and Lily are exactly what I want. Mom just needs time to adjust. She's been the most important woman in my life for 34 years. It's natural for her to feel a little territorial." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that Katherine's coldness was just maternal protectiveness that would fade once she got to know us better. But I recognized the signs from my childhood, from my relationship with Marcus. Katherine wasn't being protective, she was being strategic. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became clear. Katherine would call David multiple times a day, always with some urgent matter that required his immediate attention. A problem with her investment portfolio that needed his financial expertise. A social event she needed him to escort her to because she couldn't possibly go alone. A health scare that turned out to be nothing but required hours of phone calls and doctor visits. Each crisis was carefully timed to interrupt our plans. Date nights were canceled because Katherine needed David to drive her to the emergency room for what turned out to be indigestion. Weekend trips were postponed because she'd scheduled important meetings that only David could handle for her charitable foundation. "She seems to have a lot of emergencies," I observed after our third canceled dinner reservation. "She's getting older," David explained. "Since Dad died, she relies on me more. It's temporary. Once she adjusts to being alone, things will settle down." But Katherine wasn't adjusting. She was establishing dominance. Every canceled plan, every interrupted evening, every urgent phone call was a reminder that she came first in David's life, and that Lily and I were secondary considerations. Thought. Manipulation was so subtle, so carefully orchestrated that David couldn't see it. To him, his mother was a grieving widow who needed extra support during a difficult transition. To me, she was a skilled strategist systematically undermining my relationship with her son. When David proposed 3 weeks later, I said yes because I loved him and believed we could build a life together despite his mother's objections. I thought that once we were married, once Katherine saw how committed we were to each other, she would accept reality and find a way to coexist with us. I had no idea that our engagement would be the declaration of war Katherine had been waiting for. The engagement ring had barely been on my finger for 24 hours when Katherine's campaign began in earnest. The morning after David proposed, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. I was getting ready for my shift at the hospital, trying to be quiet, so I wouldn't wake Lily when Katherine's name appeared on the caller ID. "Sophia, dear," she said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to congratulate you on your engagement and discuss some important matters regarding the wedding planning." Important matters. At 6:30 in the morning. "I've been thinking about venues," she continued without waiting for my response. "The Grandview Country Club would be perfect, of course. I'm on the board so I can arrange everything. We'll need to book at least 18 months in advance for the grand ballroom, which means a summer wedding next year would be ideal." I hadn't even had coffee yet, and Katherine was already making decisions about my wedding. "That's very generous," I managed. "But David and I haven't discussed details yet. We were thinking something smaller, more intimate." "Oh, but darling," Katherine interrupted. "David comes from a prominent family. There are expectations, social obligations. The Brennan name carries weight in this community, and the wedding needs to reflect that status appropriately." She rattled off a guest list that included names I'd never heard: business associates, country club members, family friends from David's childhood. When I mentioned that my side would be much smaller, Katherine's tone shifted slightly. "Course, we'll make accommodations for your more modest guest list. Perhaps we could arrange separate seating areas to make everyone comfortable." Separate seating areas. Like my family and friends were somehow contaminated and needed to be quarantined from the respectable people. This conversation set the tone for the next 8 months. Katherine positioned herself as the wedding expert, the one who understood how these things are done in proper society. Every suggestion I made was met with gentle correction, as if I were a child who needed guidance about adult matters. When I showed David the simple white dress I'd fallen in love with at Millbrook, bridal Katherine somehow appeared at the shop the next day with 3 alternatives that were more appropriate for the occasion. The dresses she'd selected were elaborate, expensive, and completely wrong for my taste. All puffed sleeves and beading that made me look like I was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. "This one would be perfect," she told the saleswoman, holding up a gown that cost more than I made in 2 months. "Very classic, very elegant. exactly what you'd expect for a Brennan family wedding. The saleswoman looked between Katherine and me, clearly confused about who was actually getting married. When I politely said I preferred the simpler dress, Katherine's smile tightened. "Of course, it's your choice, dear," she said. "Though I do think you'll want something with more presence for such an important occasion. David has such refined taste in these matters." She was implying that my choice would somehow disappoint David, that my simple dress wasn't sophisticated enough for his standards. Every conversation became a minefield where Katherine would plant seeds of doubt about whether I was good enough for her son. The floral arrangements became another battleground. I wanted wildflowers and baby's breath, simple, natural, affordable. Katherine insisted on elaborate orchid arrangements that would cost thousands of dollars. "Orchids are so much more sophisticated," she explained to the florist while I stood. "They're feeling dismissed. They photograph beautifully and they last longer than those field flowers Sophia was considering." Field flowers. She made my wildflowers sound like weeds I'd picked from a roadside ditch. When I tried to discuss the budget constraints, Katherine waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about the cost, dear. David and I will handle the financial arrangements. This is his wedding, after all." His wedding. Not our wedding, not my wedding. His wedding that I was somehow being allowed to attend. The manipulation extended far beyond wedding planning. Katherine began inserting herself into every aspect of our relationship with surgical precision. She would call David during our dinner conversations, always with something that couldn't wait until tomorrow. She would schedule mother-son lunches during times she knew I had days off, ensuring that David's free time was allocated to her rather than to building our life together. Most insidiously, she began undermining my relationship with Lily. During the few occasions when Katherine agreed to spend time with my daughter, she would make subtle comparisons to other children she knew. Children who were more accomplished, better behaved, from more stable backgrounds. "My friend Margaret's granddaughter is the same age as Lily," Katherine mentioned casually during one of her visits. "She's already reading at a high school level and speaks 3 languages. Private tutoring makes such a difference, doesn't it?" Lily was an excellent student who read voraciously and maintained straight A's, but Katherine's comment made it sound like she was somehow underachieving. When Lily showed Katherine a painting she'd made in art class, Katherine's response was lukewarm. Praise followed by suggestions for proper art lessons that could help her develop real technique. Every interaction was designed to make Lily feel like she wasn't quite good enough, while simultaneously making me feel like I wasn't providing adequate opportunities for my daughter. The most devastating attack came disguised as generosity. 6 months before the wedding, Katherine announced that she wanted to pay for Lily's education at Millbrook Academy, the exclusive private school where the children of wealthy families received their elementary education. "It would be such a wonderful opportunity for her," Katherine explained during Sunday dinner at her house. "The academic standards are so much higher than public school, and she'd be surrounded by children from the finest families in town." David was immediately enthusiastic. "That's incredibly generous, Mom. Lily would get such a better education there." I felt trapped. How could I refuse such an expensive gift without seeming ungrateful? But I also understood what Katherine was really offering: the chance to remove Lily from her current school, her friends, her familiar environment, and place her in a setting where she would be the charity case among wealthy children. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but Lily is very happy at Jefferson Elementary. She has close friendships there, and the teachers know her well." Katherine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Of course, if you prefer to keep her in public school, that's your choice as her mother. I just thought you'd want the best possible opportunities for her future." The implication was clear. Rejecting Katherine's offer meant I was choosing what was convenient for me over what was best for Lily. David looked confused by my hesitation, clearly wondering why I wouldn't jump at such a generous opportunity. That night, David and I had our first real argument about his mother. "I don't understand why you're being resistant to Mom's suggestions," he said as we got ready for bed. "She's trying to help, trying to make things special for us." "She's not making suggestions," I replied. "She's making decisions. About our wedding, about Lily's education, about how we should live our lives. She has experience with these things. She knows how to navigate social situations that might be new to you, new to me." There it was, the assumption that I was somehow unprepared for the world David lived in, that I needed Katherine's guidance to function in proper society. "I'm not incapable of planning my own wedding or making decisions about my daughter's education," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "That's not what I meant," David said quickly. "I just think you might be misinterpreting Mom's intentions. She can be a little intense about family matters, but her heart is in the right place." I wanted to explain about the coded insults, the strategic interruptions, the way Katherine systematically made me feel inadequate. But how do you explain manipulation to someone? Who doesn't want to see it? How do you point out patterns of behavior to someone who's been trained from childhood to interpret those same patterns as love and concern? The worst part was that Katherine's tactics were working. I found myself second-guessing decisions I would have made confidently before. Was my dress choice too simple? Was I being selfish by keeping Lily in public school? Was I failing to appreciate the opportunities Katherine was offering because of my own insecurities? She was gaslighting me so skillfully that I began to question my own perceptions. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe I was reading malice into actions that were genuinely well-intentioned. Maybe the problem wasn't Katherine's behavior. Maybe the problem was my inability to accept help gracefully. 3 months before the wedding, Katherine made her boldest move yet. She arranged a surprise engagement party at the country club, inviting dozens of people I'd never met, and presenting it as a generous gesture to celebrate our upcoming marriage. "I wanted to introduce Sophia to our community," she announced to the assembled guests, most of whom looked at me like I was an exotic specimen they were trying to identify. "She's been so isolated, working such long hours at the hospital. I thought it was time she met some of the wonderful people who will be her new neighbors and friends." Isolated. She made my work as a pediatric nurse sound like antisocial behavior. The party was a carefully orchestrated display of everything I wasn't. The women were perfectly groomed, discussing charity galas and tennis tournaments and vacation homes in the Hamptons. The men talked about business deals and golf handicaps and investment strategies. I stood among them in my department store, dress, smiling politely while feeling like an imposter at my own engagement party. Katherine moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, making introductions that somehow always included subtle reminders of my outsider status. "This is Sophia, David's fiancée," she would say. "She's a nurse at the hospital. Such important work, really. And this is her daughter Lily from her previous relationship. Previous relationship. Not marriage, not even a long-term partnership. Just a vague previous relationship that had produced a child." By the end of the evening, I felt emotionally bruised and exhausted. David was beaming, convinced that his mother had done something wonderful for us. He couldn't see that the party hadn't been about celebrating our engagement. It had been about establishing social hierarchy and making sure everyone understood exactly where I fit in the pecking order. That night, I lay awake wondering if I was strong enough to spend the rest of my life fighting this subtle war with Katherine Brennan. I wondered if love was enough to overcome the systematic campaign she was waging against my place in David's life. I had no idea that the real battle hadn't even begun yet. Our wedding day was beautiful, despite Katherine's best efforts to make it feel like her personal showcase rather than our celebration. The ceremony at Grandview Country Club went off without a hitch. The orchids were stunning, the guest list was appropriately impressive, and I managed to look like I belonged in the elaborate dress Katherine had finally convinced me to wear. For 18 months after the wedding, I thought we'd found our equilibrium. Katherine had won the battle over the wedding details. But now that David and I were officially married, surely she would step back and let us build our own life together. David, Lily, and I settled into our routine as a family in our new house, on Sycamore Lane. A beautiful colonial that David had insisted on buying despite my protests that it was more space than we needed. "We're going to fill it with love and laughter," he'd said, spinning Lily around the empty living room while she giggled. "Maybe add a few more kids to run around these halls." Those were good months. David adopted Lily officially, and she started calling him Dad without any prompting from either of us. I finished my nurse practitioner program and took a position at Millbrook Family Medical Center, finally achieving the career goal I'd been working toward for years. We hosted dinner parties, went on family vacations, and began talking seriously about having a baby together. Katherine seemed to accept our new normal. Her visits became less frequent, her phone calls less intrusive. She was still cool toward me, but she made an effort with Lily, remembering her school events and occasionally bringing small gifts. I began to think that maybe David had been right. Maybe she just needed time to adjust to sharing her son with another family. I should have known that Katherine Brennan never retreated. She regrouped. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at work, reviewing patient charts, when my phone rang with David's number. His voice was shaking when I answered. "Sophia, you need to come to Millbrook General immediately." "It's Mom, she collapsed at home. They think it might be a stroke." I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later to find David pacing in the ICU waiting room, his face pale with worry. Katherine had been found unconscious in her kitchen by her housekeeper and rushed to the emergency room. The initial tests suggested a minor stroke, though the doctors were still running diagnostics to determine the extent of the damage. "She was fine yesterday," David kept saying. "We had lunch together, and she seemed completely normal." How does something like this just happen? I stayed with him through the long hours of waiting, holding his hand while doctors came and went with updates. Katherine was stable, but would need extensive rehabilitation. There was some paralysis on her left side, and her speech was significantly affected. She would need round-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. "We'll bring her home with us," David announced without consulting me. "She can't live alone anymore, and I'm not putting her in some facility." My heart sank, but what could I say? His mother had just suffered a stroke. This wasn't the time to argue about household arrangements or boundaries. We converted the guest room on the first floor into a medical suite, hired private nurses for day shifts, and prepared to become Katherine's primary caregivers. The first few weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Katherine was weak, frustrated by her physical limitations, and struggling with speech that came out garbled and difficult to understand. I felt genuine sympathy for her situation. Strokes are devastating at any age, but at 72, the recovery process would be long and uncertain. I used my medical training to coordinate her care, working with her physicians to develop rehabilitation plans and ensure she was getting the best possible treatment. Despite our complicated history, I was determined to help her recover as much function as possible. Maybe this crisis would finally bring us together as a family. But as Katherine regained her strength, I began to notice things that didn't quite add up. Her speech difficulties seemed inconsistent. With the doctors and nurses, she struggled to form complete sentences, but I occasionally overheard her speaking. Clearly, during phone conversations, she thought no one was monitoring. Her paralysis appeared more pronounced during medical evaluations than during moments when she thought she was unobserved. Most telling were her interactions with Lily. Katherine had always been cool toward my daughter, but during her recovery, she became openly hostile in subtle ways that others might miss, but that Lily definitely noticed. When Lily would try to help by bringing Katherine water or adjusting her blankets, Katherine would bat her away irritably, muttering things like, "Don't need that child, touching my things." The physical therapist commented on Katherine's remarkable recovery rate and suggested she might regain full function sooner than initially predicted. But whenever David was around, Katherine's symptoms seemed more severe, her needs more pressing. 6 months into her recovery, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was bringing Katherine her evening medications when I heard her on the phone in her room. The door was slightly ajar, and her voice was completely clear, with no trace of the speech difficulties she displayed around her medical team. "The plan is working perfectly," she was saying to whoever was on the other end of the call. "David feels so guilty about my condition that he won't even discuss the possibility of me moving out. I have them exactly where I want them." My blood ran cold. I pressed closer to the door, straining to hear more. The girl is becoming suspicious, but David won't listen to anything negative about my recovery. He's so desperate to believe I'm getting better that he can't see what's really happening. The girl, she was talking about me. "I know it's been difficult, Margaret, but this gives me the opportunity I've been waiting for." Living in their house, watching their daily routines, seeing how she really treats David when she thinks no one is paying attention. I'm documenting everything. My hands were shaking as I listened to Katherine describe her plan to expose Sophia's true nature to David. She talked about keeping detailed notes on our arguments, photographing any signs of tension in our household, and building a case that I was making David's life miserable. "Once I have enough evidence," she continued, "I'll present it all to David. He'll see that she's been manipulating him from the beginning, isolating him from his family, using that child to trap him in a marriage he never really wanted." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Katherine's stroke hadn't been the random medical event we'd all believed. Or rather, it had been real. But she was using her recovery as an opportunity to live in our house and systematically undermine my marriage from the inside. Over the next few weeks, I began paying closer attention to Katherine's behavior. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. She was deliberately creating conflicts between David and me. When David asked me to work late to cover for a colleague, Katherine would make comments about how I was always putting work before family. When I tried to maintain some discipline with Lily, Katherine would undermine me by suggesting I was being too harsh with my daughter. Most insidiously, she was rewriting the narrative of our family dynamics. In conversations with David, she would describe incidents that had happened differently than I remembered them. Arguments that had been minor disagreements became major conflicts in Katherine's retelling. Moments of normal family stress became evidence of deeper marital problems. "I'm worried about you, darling," I heard her tell David one evening. "Living with someone who's always stressed, always unhappy, it's not healthy for you or for Lily. Always stressed, always unhappy." Katherine was describing a version of me that didn't exist, but she was doing it so consistently that I began to wonder if David was starting to believe her. The documentation she'd mentioned became apparent when I accidentally discovered a folder on her nightstand labeled Household Observations. Inside were detailed notes about my work schedule, my conversations with Lily, my interactions with David. She was building a case against me like I was some kind of criminal rather than her daughter-in-law. September 15th. Sophia raised her voice at Lily about homework. Child appeared distressed. September 18th. Sophia came home late from work without calling. David had to handle dinner alone. September 22nd. Overheard Sophia complaining to her mother about David's family obligations. Every entry was designed to make me look like a selfish, neglectful wife and mother. None of them included context. That Lily had been procrastinating on an important project, that I'd stayed late to help a colleague with a medical emergency, that I'd been venting about feeling overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities. The most devastating realization was that Katherine's plan was working. David had become distant, questioning, less affectionate. When I tried to discuss my concerns about his mother's behavior, he would get defensive and suggest that I was being insensitive to someone who was still recovering from a serious medical event. "She's not the same person she was before the stroke." He would say, "We need to be patient with her." But I knew the truth. Katherine was exactly the same person she'd always been: manipulative, calculating, and determined to destroy my place in David's life. The stroke had just given her the perfect cover to move into our house and wage her campaign more effectively. Then came the morning that changed everything forever. David left early for a business trip to Chicago, a 3-day conference that would keep him away until Friday. Katherine seemed particularly pleased by his absence, making comments about how peaceful the house felt without his work stress. That evening, as I was getting Lily ready for bed, we heard Katherine on the phone in her room again. But this time, Lily heard it too. "Mommy," she whispered. "Grandma Katherine sounds different when she talks on the phone. Her words aren't all mixed up like they are with the doctors." My 8-year-old daughter had noticed what the medical professionals had missed. Katherine's speech problems were largely performative, designed to maintain the illusion of disability, while she plotted against our family. That night, Lily came to me with her tablet. "Mom, I need to show you something," she said, her expression serious beyond her years. "I've been taking screenshots." What she showed me changed everything. For months, Lily had been quietly documenting the text messages that Katherine sent to David, messages that painted me as an increasingly unstable and controlling wife. "I thought Daddy should know what Grandma Katherine was really saying about us," Lily explained. "But I didn't know how to tell him without getting in trouble." As I scrolled through dozens of screenshots, I realized that Katherine's manipulation went far deeper than I'd imagined. She wasn't just living in our house and making observations. She was actively working to destroy my marriage through a carefully orchestrated campaign of lies and emotional manipulation. And tomorrow, David would be home, and Katherine would continue her work of poisoning him against me, unless I found a way to expose the truth first. David came home from Chicago on Friday evening in the worst mood I'd seen him in months. He barely kissed me hello, gave Lily a distracted hug, and went straight to check on his mother. I could hear them talking in low voices in her room, and something about their conversation made my stomach clench with dread. When he finally came to our bedroom that night, his expression was cold in a way I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him and leaning against it like he was blocking an escape route. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Mom told me about some things that happened while I was away," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Things I need to understand." My heart started racing. "What kind of things?" David pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. They were from Katherine, sent throughout the 3 days he'd been gone. And they painted a picture of me that was both devastating and completely false. Wednesday, 9:47 p.m. Sophia seemed very agitated tonight. Raised her voice at Lily over something trivial. The poor child went to bed crying. Thursday, 2:15 a.m. Couldn't sleep. Heard Sophia on the phone with someone, talking about how exhausted she is by family obligations. Sounded like she was planning something. Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Sophia came home from work very late. When I asked if everything was okay, she snapped at me about managing the household better. I was just trying to help. Friday, 10:22 a.m. I'm worried about you, darling. The tension in this house is affecting everyone, especially Lily. I think we need to discuss some changes when you get home. I stared at the messages in disbelief. Every single one was either a complete fabrication or a twisted version of normal interactions. Yes, I'd had to correct Lily about her bedtime routine, but she hadn't gone to bed crying. Yes, I'd talked to my mother on the phone about feeling overwhelmed, but I wasn't planning something. I was asking for advice about balancing work and caregiving. Yes, I'd been tired when I came home on Thursday, but I'd never snapped at Katherine about household management. David, None of this is what really happened, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Your mother is manipulating the situation. Manipulating? David's eyebrows rose. She's a 72-year-old stroke victim living in our guest room. How exactly is she manipulating anything? She's not as impaired as she's pretending to be, I said, knowing how crazy it would sound. I've heard her speaking clearly on the phone. Her symptoms are inconsistent. She's deliberately creating problems between us. David stared at me like I'd just accused his mother of being an alien. Listen to yourself, Sophia. You're suggesting that my mother is faking stroke symptoms and manufacturing conflicts. Do you realize how paranoid that sounds? Paranoid. The word hit me like a slap. This was exactly what Katherine wanted, for David to see me as unstable, suspicious, someone who would make wild accusations against a helpless elderly woman. I know how it sounds, I said desperately, but you have to believe me. She's been planning this since she moved in. She's documenting everything, twisting normal family interactions to make me look bad. Documenting? David's voice was getting colder. What are you talking about? I told him about the folder I'd found, about the notes Katherine had been keeping. But as I spoke, I could see David withdrawing further, his expression becoming more skeptical. You went through my mother's personal belongings? He asked. You violated her privacy while she's recovering from a stroke? I was bringing her medication and I saw— You saw what you wanted to see, David interrupted. Mom keeping notes about her daily routine isn't some conspiracy against you. She's probably trying to track her own recovery progress. Nothing, I said, was getting through to him. Katherine had laid the groundwork too well, painting me as the unstable one while positioning herself as the victim. Every piece of evidence I presented was reframed as proof of my paranoia rather than her manipulation. The argument escalated from there. David accused me of being resentful about his mother's presence in our home. I accused him of being blind to his mother's true nature. We said things to each other that night that couldn't be taken back, words that felt like they were tearing holes in the fabric of our marriage. Maybe Mom was right, David finally said, his voice quiet but cutting. Maybe you have been poisoning our relationship. Maybe you've been so focused on seeing her as the enemy that you've become one yourself. Poisoning our relationship. Katherine's exact phrase, now coming out of my husband's mouth. I stared at him, feeling like I was drowning. You really believe that? You think I've been trying to destroy our marriage? I think you've been unhappy for a long time, David said. I think having Mom here has brought out something in you that I don't recognize. The woman I married wouldn't make these kinds of accusations about a sick elderly woman. That night, David slept in the guest room upstairs. For the first time since we'd been married, we went to bed angry and woke up strangers. The next morning, Katherine was at her most solicitous, asking if I was feeling well, commenting on how tired I looked. Her concern felt like acid on an open wound. You and David seemed to have quite a discussion last night, she said as I poured my coffee. I hope everything is all right between you two. I wanted to scream at her, to tear off her mask of innocent concern and force David to see who she really was. Instead, I just nodded and escaped to work, where I could pretend for 8 hours that my marriage wasn't falling apart. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern continued and intensified. Katherine would manufacture small crises that somehow always made me look unreasonable or uncaring. She would text David throughout the day with observations about my behavior that were calculated to make him question my stability and commitment to our family. The worst part was watching how it affected Lily. My daughter could sense the tension between David and me, and she began withdrawing, spending more time in her room, becoming quiet during family dinners. When I tried to talk to her about it, she would just shrug and say everything was fine, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Katherine, meanwhile, began positioning herself as Lily's protector. She would make comments about how children needed Stability and consistency. How family conflict could be so damaging to a young person's development. She never directly criticized me, but the implication was clear. I was the source of instability in Lily's life. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in late October. David had gone to play golf with his college friends, leaving me home with Katherine and Lily. I was trying to catch up on household tasks while Lily worked on a school project at the kitchen table. Katherine called me into her room, claiming she needed help adjusting her bed position. When I arrived, she was sitting up perfectly fine, her phone in her hand. "I wanted to show you something," she said, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Not the artificial sweetness she usually used with me, but something cold and satisfied. She turned her phone screen toward me. It was open to a text conversation with David, and the messages made my blood freeze. "Katherine, I'm really concerned about Sophia's behavior lately. She seems increasingly unstable." David, "What do you mean?" Katherine, "Yesterday she accused me of spying on your family. She went through my personal belongings and made wild claims about me faking my stroke symptoms. I'm worried she might be having some kind of breakdown." David, "That does sound concerning. Has she been acting strangely with Lily?" Katherine, "She's been very short-tempered with the poor child. Lily actually came to me yesterday asking if you and Sophia were going to get divorced. I didn't know what to tell her. I stared at the screen, feeling like I was watching my marriage dissolve in real time. Every word was carefully crafted to make me sound unhinged while painting Katherine as the concerned grandmother trying to protect everyone from my alleged instability. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. Katherine's mask finally slipped completely. Her expression became triumphant, almost gleeful. "Because I want you to understand exactly what's happening here," she said. "I want you to see how easy it's been to turn David against you." The artificial frailty was gone from her voice. She spoke clearly, confidently, like someone who had just won a long and complex game. "Did you really think you could waltz into my son's life and replace me as the most important woman in his world?" she continued. "Did you think I would just step aside and let some little gold digger with a bastard child take everything my family has built?" The words hit me like physical blows, but what was worse was the calculating coldness in her eyes. This wasn't emotional anger. This was strategic destruction, carried out with surgical precision. "You've been planning this since you moved in," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place completely. "I've been planning this since the day David first mentioned your name," Katherine corrected. "The stroke was just an opportunity I decided to use more effectively than I originally intended." She gestured to her phone. "David already half believes you're having some kind of mental breakdown. It won't take much more to convince him that you're unstable, possibly even dangerous. A few more carefully documented incidents, maybe a call to Child Protective Services expressing concern about Lily's welfare. The threat hung in the air between us like poison. She wasn't just trying to destroy my marriage. She was threatening to take my daughter away." "You're insane," I breathed. Katherine laughed, a sound that was genuinely cheerful. "No, dear, I'm effective, and by the time I'm finished, everyone will believe that you're the insane one." That's when we heard Lily's voice from the doorway. "Mommy? Grandma Katherine? Is everything okay?" I turned to see my 8-year-old daughter standing in the hallway, her tablet clutched in her hands, her eyes wide with shock, and I realized that she had heard everything. Every word of Katherine's confession, every detail of her plan to destroy our family. Katherine realized it too. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely rattled. "Lily, sweetheart," she started, immediately switching back to her grandmother voice. "We were just having a little disagreement. Nothing for you to worry about." But Lily wasn't looking at Katherine. She was looking at me, and in her eyes, I saw something that gave me hope for the first time in weeks. I saw understanding, and I saw determination. My 8-year-old daughter had just witnessed the truth about Katherine Brennan, and she was holding her tablet like it was a weapon she was finally ready to use. Lily stepped fully into Katherine's room, her small fingers, gripping her tablet with the kind of determination I'd only seen when she was absolutely certain about something important. "Grandma Katherine," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I heard what you just said to my mom." Katherine's face went through a rapid transformation, from shock to calculation to her practiced grandmother smile. "Oh, sweetheart, grown-ups sometimes have complicated conversations that might sound confusing to little ears. Why don't you go finish your homework, and we can talk about this later?" But Lily didn't move. She looked directly at Katherine with an expression that was far too mature for her 8 years. "You said you've been planning to hurt my mom since before you even met her. You said you want to call people to take me away from her." The silence in the room was electric. Katherine's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words. That would put the genie back in the bottle. But Lily wasn't done. "And you lied about being sick," Lily continued. "Your words aren't mixed up when you talk on the phone. I've been listening. You talk perfectly fine when you think nobody's paying attention." Katherine's composure cracked completely. "Lily, you don't understand what you heard. Sometimes adults have to—" "I understand exactly what I heard," Lily interrupted, holding up her tablet. "And I recorded it." The room went dead silent. Katherine stared at the tablet like it was a snake about. "To strike, what do you mean recorded it?" Katherine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lily's thumb moved across the screen. "I've been using the voice recorder app whenever you and Mom talk, because something felt wrong. Dad taught me how to use it for school projects, but I thought, maybe I should use it to help Mom." She tapped the screen, and suddenly Katherine's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably vindictive. "Did you really think you could waltz into my son's life and replace me as the most important woman in his world? Did you think I would just step aside and let some little gold digger with a bastard child take everything my family has built?" Katherine lunged forward, trying to grab the tablet, but I stepped between them. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." "Delete that," Katherine hissed. All pretense of frailty gone. "Delete it right now." "No," Lily said simply. "Dad needs to hear this. He needs to know what you really think about us." Katherine's face was flushed red, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "You little brat, you don't know what you're doing. That recording was private." "It wasn't private," Lily shot back. "You were talking to my mom in our house about hurting our family. That's not private." I knelt down beside Lily, my hands shaking. "Sweetheart, how long have you been recording conversations?" "Since you and Dad started fighting more," she said. "I heard you crying in your room one night, and I knew something was wrong. So I started paying attention." She scrolled through her tablet, showing me folder after folder of audio recordings. I have her talking to her friends on the phone about how she's going to fix the David situation. I have her practicing what to say to make her words sound mixed up. And I have all the conversations where she plans what lies to tell Dad about you. My heart was breaking and soaring at the same time. My 8-year-old daughter had been conducting her own investigation, protecting our family in ways I never could have imagined. Katherine was backing toward the door, clearly planning to escape, but Lily's voice stopped her. "I also have the screenshots of all your text messages to Dad," Lily said calmly. "The ones where you lie about Mom being mean to me and stuff. I know how to take screenshots on Dad's tablet when he's not looking." "You've been spying on me," Katherine accused, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "I've been protecting my family," Lily corrected, "just like you said you were doing. Except I'm telling the truth, and you're not." That's when we heard David's car in the driveway. He was home early from golf, probably because Katherine had texted him some new crisis that required his immediate attention. Katherine's eyes went wide with panic. "Lily, if you show those recordings to your father, you'll destroy this family. Is that what you want?" You already tried to destroy our family, Lily replied. I'm trying to save it. David's footsteps echoed through the house, and his voice called out, Mom? Sophia? I got your text about Lily being upset. What's going on? Katherine made one last desperate attempt to regain control. She collapsed back onto her bed, instantly adopting the posture of a frail stroke victim. Oh, David, thank goodness you're home. Sophia and Lily they've been saying terrible things. I think Sophia might be having some kind of episode. David appeared in the doorway, looking concerned and confused. His eyes went from Katherine, who was now trembling and speaking in her affected, halting manner, to me, standing protectively beside Lily, to our daughter, who was holding her tablet like it contained the secrets of the universe. What's going on here? He asked. Dad, Lily said, stepping forward. I need to show you something important. About Grandma Katherine. Lily, now isn't the time, David said gently. Grandma Katherine seems very upset and… She's not upset, Lily interrupted. She's pretending. Just like she's been pretending about everything else. David looked at me with that expression I'd grown to hate, the one that suggested I was somehow responsible for whatever chaos he'd walked into. Sophia, what happened? Before I could answer, Lily pressed play on her tablet. Katherine's voice filled the room, clear and strong and full of venom. I've been planning this since the day David first mentioned your name. The stroke was just an opportunity I decided to use more effectively than I originally intended. David's face went completely blank. He stared at the tablet like he couldn't process what he was hearing. Lily let the recording continue. Katherine's confession played out in its entirety. Her admission of manipulation, her threats about child protective services, her revelation that she'd been faking the severity of her stroke symptoms. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. David looked from the tablet to his mother, who was no longer trembling or speaking in halting phrases. She was sitting upright, her face flushed with anger and defeat. Mom? David's voice was barely a whisper. Katherine tried one more time to salvage the situation. David, you can't believe everything you hear on these devices. They can be manipulated, edited. Is it true? David asked, his voice getting stronger. Have you been faking your symptoms? I haven't been faking anything, Katherine said, but her protest sounded hollow even to her own ears. Lily stepped forward again. I have more recordings, Dad. Lots of them. Want to hear the one where she practices talking like her words are mixed up? Or the one where she tells Mrs. Patterson from next door that she's going to make sure Mom leaves you? David's face was changing, cycling through disbelief, hurt, and something that looked like recognition. Show me, he said quietly. For the next 20 minutes, Lily played recording after recording. Katherine's real voice, planning and scheming. Katherine on the phone with friends, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate David. Katherine practicing, her stroke symptoms like an actress rehearsing for a role. With each recording, David seemed to shrink a little more, the weight of his mother's deception settling on his shoulders like a crushing load. Finally, Lily showed him the screenshots of Katherine's text messages, not just the ones David had received, but the ones she'd sent to other people describing her project of destroying his marriage. I'm sorry, Dad, Lily said softly. I know this hurts. But I couldn't let her keep lying about Mom. Mom's been sad for weeks, and you've been mad at her for things she didn't do. David looked at me with eyes full of pain and regret. Sophia, I'm so sorry. I believed her. I actually believed you believed your mother, I said gently. That's what sons are supposed to do. I chose her over you, he said, his voice breaking. I made you feel crazy and paranoid when you were telling the truth the whole time. Katherine had been silent during this entire exchange, but now she made one final attempt to control the narrative. David, you have to understand, I was trying. To protect you. That woman trapped you with her child, manipulated you into marriage. Stop. David's voice cut through her words like a blade. Just stop talking. He turned to Katherine, and for the first time in his adult life, I saw him look at his mother without love, without automatic deference. How long have you been planning this? Katherine lifted her chin defiantly. I've been protecting my son's interests since he was old enough to make poor decisions about women. Protecting me? David's voice rose. You nearly destroyed my marriage. You made me doubt the woman I love. You terrorized my daughter and made her feel like she had to secretly record conversations to protect her own mother. Your daughter, Katherine spat, the mask finally off completely. She's not your daughter. She's the bastard child of some deadbeat who abandoned them both. You're raising another man's mistake. The words hung in the air like poison, but they didn't have the effect Katherine intended. Instead of driving a wedge between David and Lily, they seemed to crystallize something in him. David walked over to Lily and put his hands on her shoulders. You are my daughter, he said firmly. You have been since the day I met you, and you just saved our family. Then he turned to Katherine. Pack your things. You're leaving. Today. David, you can't be serious, Katherine started. I'm completely serious, he said. You're going to pack your belongings and you're going to leave this house. And if you ever contact any of us again, if you ever try to hurt my wife or my daughter, I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who you really are. Katherine's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally, defeat. She had played her hand and lost everything. But the real victory belonged to Lily, who had saved our family with nothing but truth, courage, and a child's unshakable sense of justice. As Katherine began gathering her things, David took my hands and looked into my eyes. Can you forgive me? He asked. I looked at our daughter, who was watching us with hope and determination, and I knew that our family was going to be okay. We'll figure it out, I said, together. She was very good at it, I said. She'd had years of practice manipulating people while maintaining plausible deniability. But you saw it, he said. You tried to tell me, and I made you feel like you were crazy. The guilt in his voice was heartbreaking, but I knew that wallowing in regret wouldn't help us move forward. You loved your mother. That's not a character flaw, David. That's what made you the kind of man I wanted to marry. We talked about Lily, too. How she'd carried the burden of knowing something was wrong for months, how she'd taken it upon herself to document the truth when the adults around her couldn't see it. She's 8 years old, David said wonderingly. She shouldn't have had to protect us from my mother. She shouldn't have had to choose between family loyalty and justice. But she did choose, I pointed out. She chose truth. She chose our family. And she was braver than either of us. The next morning, Lily found us in the kitchen making breakfast together for the first time in weeks. She looked cautious, like she wasn't sure if the peace between David and me was real or temporary. Is Grandma Katherine coming back? She asked quietly. No, sweetheart, David said, kneeling down to her level. She's not coming back, and I owe you an apology. Lily tilted her head, waiting. I'm sorry I didn't listen when you tried to tell me something was wrong, David continued. I'm sorry you felt like you had to handle this situation by yourself. That was my job, not yours. I was scared, Lily admitted. I was scared that if I showed you the recordings, you might get mad at me for recording people without permission. Oh, baby, I said, pulling her into a hug. You did the right thing. You saved our family. David wrapped his arms around both of us. From now on, if something feels wrong to you, I promise I'll listen. Really listen. Your instincts are clearly better than mine. The healing process wasn't instantaneous or simple. For weeks afterward, we all dealt with the emotional aftermath of Katherine's campaign. David struggled with guilt and anger at himself for being so thoroughly manipulated. I worked through my own feelings of betrayal and vindication, relieved to be proven right, but hurt by how long it had taken for the truth to come out. Lily, meanwhile, seemed to blossom once the tension in our house disappeared. She started sleeping better, laughing more, bringing friends over after school. It was like watching a flower that had been growing in shadow finally reach sunlight. But she also asked hard questions that forced us to have conversations we'd been avoiding. Why did Grandma Katherine hate us so much? She asked one evening while we were making dinner together. David and I exchanged glances, trying to figure out how to explain toxic behavior to a child without destroying her faith in human nature. Some people have trouble sharing love, I said, finally. They think that if someone they care about loves other people, it means there's less love for them. But that's not how love works. Love isn't like pizza, David added, making Lily giggle. When you share pizza, everyone gets smaller pieces, but when you share love, it actually grows bigger. Grandma Katherine thought that if Dad loved us, he couldn't love her as much, I continued. But that's not true. Families can love lots of people at the same time. So she was wrong and mean, Lily concluded with the stark clarity that children bring to complex situations. She was wrong, David agreed, and she made some very hurtful choices because of being wrong. Over the following months, we established new patterns and routines that didn't revolve around Katherine's manufactured crises. David's phone stopped buzzing with urgent texts at all hours. Our dinner conversations weren't interrupted by emergency calls. Weekend plans actually happened as scheduled. Most importantly, David and I learned to communicate more directly about problems instead of letting resentment build up in silence. We went to couples counseling, something I'd suggested months earlier, but David had resisted, thinking it would be giving up on our marriage. Now he understood that getting help was actually fighting for our relationship. I realize now that I was raised to see conflict as disloyalty, he told our counselor during one session. My mother taught me that questioning family members meant you didn't love them enough. So when Sophia raised concerns about my mother's behavior, I interpreted it as an attack on my family rather than an attempt to protect our family. The counseling helped us understand how Katherine had exploited normal family dynamics and weaponized David's love for his mother against our marriage. It also helped us develop strategies for dealing with future challenges without letting outside influences drive wedges between us. 6 months after Katherine's departure, we got word that she'd moved to Florida to live with her sister Margaret, the same sister she'd stayed with in London, the same sister who'd apparently been a willing accomplice in her manipulation schemes. We heard through mutual friends that Katherine was telling people she'd moved because of her health, needing a warmer climate for her recovery. She's still controlling the narrative, I observed when David shared this news. Let her, he said. The people who matter know the truth. Everyone else can believe whatever version makes them comfortable. This was growth for David. The ability to let his mother's opinions and approval go, to stop caring about maintaining her version of family harmony. A year later, Lily started 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary, where she was thriving academically and socially. During a parent-teacher conference, her teacher mentioned something that stopped me in my tracks. Lily has shown remarkable leadership skills this year, Mrs. Rodriguez said. When there's conflict on the playground, other children come to her to help solve problems. She has this amazing ability to see through drama and get to the truth of situations. I thought about my daughter, barely 9 years old, already known for her wisdom and integrity. The skills she'd developed during our family crisis, the ability to observe carefully, document evidence, and speak truth to power, were serving her well in navigating childhood friendships and school dynamics. That night, I told Lily what her teacher had said. I'm proud of you for using your experiences to help other people, I said. Grandma Katherine taught me something important, Lily replied thoughtfully. She taught me that sometimes adults lie, and sometimes kids have to be the ones to tell the truth. That's a hard lesson to learn so young, I said. But it's a good lesson, she said. Now I know that I can trust myself when something feels wrong, even if other people don't believe me at first. 2 years after Katherine's exodus, David and I welcomed our son, Thomas David Chen Brennan. Lily was thrilled to be a big sister, and watching her gentle patience with the baby reminded me daily of the remarkable young woman she was becoming. David never heard from his mother again. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas gift, not even a congratulations when Thomas was born. Part of me wondered if she ever regretted the choices she'd made, if she ever missed being part of David's life. But mostly, I was grateful for the peace her absence had brought to our family. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Katherine, if I regret that she lost her relationship with her son. The truth is, Katherine made her choices, long before I entered the picture. She chose manipulation over honesty, control over love, and ultimately, she chose to lose her family rather than share it. I think about other women who might be living through what I experienced, being gaslit by in-laws, having their reality questioned, feeling isolated and crazy while someone systematically undermines their marriage. I want them to know that their instincts matter, that their perceptions are valid, and that sometimes the people closest to the situation are the last ones to see the truth. Most of all, I want them to know that children are often the wisest witnesses in these situations. If your child is telling you something feels wrong, listen to them. If they're documenting conversations or asking questions about adult behavior, pay attention. Sometimes the smallest members of our families are the ones with the clearest vision of what's really happening. Our story isn't just about family drama or mother-in-law conflicts. It's about the power of truth, the importance of believing victims of manipulation, and the courage it takes to speak up when everyone around you is invested in maintaining a comfortable lie. If this story resonates with you, if you've experienced gaslighting or manipulation in your own family, please know that you're not alone. Your reality matters. Your peace of mind is worth protecting. And sometimes, the people trying to keep the family together are actually the ones tearing it apart. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with family manipulation or gaslighting. Let's build a community where truth-telling is valued over peacekeeping, where protecting victims is more important than protecting family reputations. Subscribe for more real stories about standing up to manipulation, trusting your instincts, and never letting anyone convince you that your reality isn't real. Because in a world full of Katherine Brennans, we need more people willing to be like Lily, brave enough to document the truth and strong enough to speak it, even when the adults around them would rather look the away. Remember, you don't need permission to protect yourself. You don't need approval to trust your instincts. And you don't owe anyone your peace of mind, not even family. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.